I was house-sitting my uncle's cabin deep in the Blue Ridge when the knocks began. He told me it'd be quiet up there, just me and the trees, maybe a few deer nosing around the porch at night. That first evening, the silence was the kind that presses on your chest. No cars, no wind, not even the soft hum of a power line. Just the steady tick of the old clock in the kitchen and the creak of the wood when it cooled. He'd left a note on the counter in his neat, careful handwriting. "Don't go near the root cellar. Leave it be. I'll deal with it when I get back." I didn't think much of it. Everyone in my family had quirks, and my uncles were just more superstitious than most. The cellar was built into the hill behind the cabin, a slanted door of old planks half buried in moss. Probably dangerous, I thought. Rotten boards, snakes, or some wild thing nesting inside. The first night passed easy enough. I made a fire, fixed some soup, read an old magazine by lantern light. I fell asleep to the sound of rain starting to patter against the tin roof. Then came the knocks, 3 of them, slow, deliberate. I woke up thinking it was part of a dream. But when I held my breath, I heard it again, 3 dull thuds, as if someone was knocking from under the floorboards. I lay there, listening, heart beating hard in my throat. The cabin was old. Wood expands, contracts, makes all kinds of noises, but this didn't sound like that. It sounded like someone trying to get my attention. I got up, bare feet on the cold plank floor, and stood in the dark listening. The knocking stopped, just the rain outside and the soft hiss of the dying fire. In the morning, I checked around the place. Nothing out of place, no sign of anyone. I told myself it had to be an animal, maybe a raccoon under the porch. I even laughed about it over breakfast. But that afternoon, when I stepped out back, I saw it. Small piles of dirt near the back door, like something had been digging. Not random scratching either. The dirt was heaped neatly, in little mounds, almost like someone had started to tunnel. I followed the marks a few feet out until the trees swallowed the light. That's when I noticed I was standing about 20 yards from the old root cellar. The door was there, sunken into the ground, its boards warped and slick with moss. One of the hinges was twisted, and a rusty chain looped through a padlock hung loose at the handle. The air around it smelled like wet earth and rot. I remembered my uncle's warning and backed away. That night, the knocking started again. Same rhythm, 3 knocks, pause, 3 more. But this time it was closer, right under my bed. I froze, staring into the dark, barely breathing. I could hear it faintly now, not just knocking, but something like breathing. Shallow and raspy, rising from beneath the floorboards. I told myself I was imagining it. That fear was making me hear things. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it across the floor. Nothing moved. No gaps, no holes, no loose boards. I didn't sleep again that night. The next morning, I walked to the old general store at the bottom of the hill. The owner, a man named Earl, had known my uncle for decades. I mentioned the cellar, just casually, and he gave me a look that lingered too long. "Your uncle still keeps that thing locked up?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "He told me not to go near it. Good advice," Earl muttered, turning back to his shelf. "That land's got hollers older than any of us. Best to leave them resting." I wanted to ask what he meant, but something in his tone made me drop it. When I got back to the cabin, the front door was open. Not wide, just enough for the latch to scrape the frame. I stepped inside slow, heart hammering, but nothing seemed disturbed. Everything was right where I'd left it. Except for one thing. There was dirt on the kitchen floor. A long trail of it, leading from the door to the center of the room, then stopping cold. That night I blocked the door with a chair, double-checked the windows, and sat awake listening. Hours passed in silence until around 2 a.m., when the knocking started again. Louder this time. The boards beneath my feet seemed to tremble with each thud. I crawled out of bed and pressed my ear to the floor. That's when I heard it clear. Breathing, slow and ragged. And something else. A faint scrape, like fingers dragging against the underside of the planks. I jumped back and stayed up until dawn. Sitting by the fire with the shotgun my uncle kept over the mantel. When the sun came up, I decided I'd had enough. I went outside, determined to check under the cabin. The space was low and narrow, just a crawl space covered in dead leaves and spider webs. Nothing but the smell of damp earth. But when I shined my flashlight toward the far corner, I saw a hole. It wasn't large, maybe 2 feet wide, but it went down at a steep angle, the dirt freshly disturbed. It looked like someone had been digging their way up. I backed out fast, my hands shaking so bad I dropped the light. That evening, I tried calling my uncle. No service. The landline was dead too. I sat by the window watching the woods grow darker, trying to convince myself to pack up and leave. But part of me was scared to go outside, scared of whatever was under that cabin, or maybe what was waiting near the cellar. Around midnight, the knocking started again. Louder, sharper, frantic. 3 quick knocks, then another 3, then silence. I shouted, "Who's there?" Nothing. Then came a sound that made my stomach twist, a low moan muffled by the floor. Not words, just a drawn-out, broken sound, like someone trying to cry through a mouthful of dirt. I ran outside. The night air hit me cold and wet. The woods were still. The moon barely lit the clearing. I turned toward the cellar. The door was open. The chain lay broken on the ground, half buried in mud. From where I stood, I could see the darkness gaping inside. A black so deep it seemed to swallow the light from my flashlight. The smell coming from it was thick and wet, like old roots and decay. I don't know what made me do it. Curiosity, fear, some mix of both, but I stepped closer. The air grew colder, heavier, and I could hear faint movement inside. Scratching, shifting, something alive. Then I saw it, a hand, pale and muddy, reaching out from the darkness. The fingers were thin, the nails broken and black. It groped blindly at the dirt, pushing upward like someone climbing out of a grave. I stumbled backward and ran. I didn't stop until I reached the front porch. When I turned around, the cellar door was shut again. I locked myself inside and waited for daylight. Every few minutes I thought I heard something dragging across the floor below me. When the morning came, I packed my things and left. I didn't even lock the cabin. I just drove until the trees thinned and the radio picked up a signal again. I called my uncle from a gas station. He answered on the first ring. His voice was calm, too calm. "You heard it, didn't you?" he said. I didn't know what to say. "I told you not to go near that cellar," he went on. "It's not the ground that's the problem, it's what's under it." Something old. My father used to say it wasn't a place to bury things. It's a place where things bury themselves. I asked him what he meant, but he just sighed. "You did right leaving. Don't go back. Let it settle." That night I stayed at a motel off the highway. I couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about the hand, the dirt under the door, the sound of that broken breathing. Sometime past midnight I heard it again. 3 knocks. Soft, deliberate. Coming from the floor beneath my bed. The night the power went out, I wasn't worried at first. Out here it happens all the time. The mountains like to remind you how small you are, how quick the dark can swallow everything when the wires go dead. I lit a couple of candles and sat out on the porch, watching the fog roll low through the trees. The quiet in these parts has weight to it, the kind that hums in your ears after a while. You don't hear it until there's nothing left to cover it up. That's when I saw the light. It moved slow through the pines along the ridge behind my cabin, a soft, golden flicker, like an old lantern being carried by someone walking the tree line. At first I thought it was a hiker, or maybe a hunter who'd gotten turned around. But the way the light moved didn't feel right. It didn't follow the path or the slope. It weaved, steady and patient, circling instead of coming down toward the road. I watched it for a long time. The longer I stared, the harder it was to tell how far away it really was. Sometimes it looked close enough that I thought I saw the faint outline of a figure holding it. Other times it seemed miles off, floating like a will-o'-the-wisp between the trees. After an hour or so, the light just blinked out, gone. The woods swallowed it whole. I didn't think much about it the next morning. The power came back. I went about my chores, but when night fell again, the light returned. Same spot, same movement. That went on for nearly a week. Every night, right after dusk, the lantern would appear on the ridge, drifting back and forth like someone walking a line that only they could see. I even tried calling out once, just to see if maybe it was a lost traveler, but the light didn't respond. It just stopped for a few seconds, then went on moving again, slower this time, almost like whoever was carrying it was listening. On the 7th night, I couldn't stand not knowing anymore. Curiosity has a way of digging at you until it becomes its own kind of fear, the kind that doesn't let you rest until you face it. So the next morning I decided to hike up there and see what it was. The ridge wasn't far, maybe half a mile of uphill trail. But the forest was thick with mist that morning. Every footstep sank into damp leaves, and the air smelled like rain and rust. The climb took longer than I thought, and more than once I got turned around. Then, just as I reached the crest of the ridge, I saw it, the lantern. It was lying in a shallow patch of dirt between two tree roots, still burning. The flame inside was small but steady, like it had been protected from the wind. It was an old miner's lantern, rusted, heavy, and real. I picked it up carefully, half expecting it to crumble, but the metal was warm to the touch. That's when I saw the boot print beside it, one print, deep, facing downhill, facing toward my cabin, no other tracks around it. Just the one. I turned the lantern off and carried it home. I set it on the porch, planning to ask around in town about it the next day. That night, the ridge stayed dark. For the first time in a week, no light appeared through the trees. I told myself that maybe whatever had been happening was over. Maybe I'd broken whatever strange routine had been playing out up there. But around midnight, I woke up to something different. A soft, orange glow, faint but close, filtering through the curtains. I thought maybe I'd left the porch light on, but the power was still out again. My stomach sank as I got out of bed and pulled the curtain back. The lantern was burning again, except now it wasn't up on the ridge. It was sitting just outside my window. I froze. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at that small, steady flame hovering just a few feet away. For a long time, I couldn't make myself move. I told myself it had to be a trick of reflection, maybe the candlelight bouncing off the glass. But the flame flickered against the mist, its glow shifting as if someone were holding it. Then it moved, not fast, just enough to tell me it wasn't sitting still. The light swayed gently, the same slow rhythm I'd seen up on the ridge. I backed away from the window and grabbed my flashlight. When I shined it outside, the beam cut through the fog, catching the faint outline of something behind the lantern. A shape. A person, maybe. But before I could focus, the light blinked out. Everything went black again. I didn't sleep after that. I sat in the living room until dawn, listening to the woods. Every few minutes, I thought I heard footsteps in the leaves, soft, circling the cabin, always just out of sight. By morning, the lantern on the porch was gone. I tried to shake it off, but the unease clung to me. I went into town that afternoon and asked around. A few of the older folks at the diner just gave each other looks when I mentioned a lantern on the ridge. One woman finally spoke up. "Miners used to die up there all the time," she said. "That ridge sits over an old shaft from the 1930s. Cave-in buried half a dozen of them. Folks say sometimes you'll see their lights still looking for a way out." I told her this wasn't a ghost story. It was a real lantern, one I'd held in my hands. She just shook her head and said, "If you found one still burning, you shouldn't have brought it back." That night I left the porch light on and kept my shotgun by the door. Around 2 a.m., I woke to the faint smell of kerosene. My first thought was that the old lamp on the counter had somehow spilled. But when I got up, the smell was stronger near the window. I looked outside. The lantern was back, burning again, this time hanging from a low branch near the edge of the clearing. Beneath it, just barely visible in the fog, was the outline of someone standing perfectly still. They weren't holding it. The lantern hung a few feet above their head, swaying slightly. Whoever, or whatever, it was didn't move, didn't look up, didn't make a sound. I watched for what felt like hours. Then the figure slowly turned and began walking back toward the ridge, the lantern following behind it as if floating in the air. When morning came, I went out there again. The branch was empty, but I found a line of footprints leading away through the mud. Bare feet. No boots this time. I followed them a little ways until the trail vanished into a patch of soft ground. There, half sunk in the mud, was something that made my skin crawl. A second lantern, identical to the first. Its glass was cracked. Its wick burned to nothing, but the metal was still warm. That night, I didn't stay inside. I took my truck and parked it a mile down the road at a neighbor's old barn. From there, I could still see the ridge when the sun went down. The light appeared again. Only this time, there wasn't just one. There were three, moving in the same slow pattern along the ridge, weaving through the trees like a silent procession. No sound, no figures, just the steady pulse of orange light in the dark. I watched until my eyes ached. Then, one by one, the lights vanished. I thought that was the end of it. until I turned around. Through the barn's open slats, I saw a faint glow reflecting off the metal of my truck. My heart nearly stopped. I walked over slowly, every step heavy, and saw what I already knew would be there. The lantern, sitting on the hood. Still burning. I didn't touch it. I just climbed in, started the truck, and drove until the road dropped out of the mountains completely. I didn't stop until I saw the first sign of power lines stretching across the valley. I stayed in town for a week after that. When I finally got up the nerve to go back, I found the cabin just as I'd left it, except for one thing. On the porch where I'd first set that lantern down, the wood was scorched in the perfect outline of a circle, like something had burned straight through the grain and stopped just before catching flame. And that night, when I turned off the lights to sleep, the room filled with the faint smell of kerosene again. Then, out past the window, deep in the black edge of the trees, a single light flickered on, slow, patient, waiting. I'd been up in that cabin for 6 days when the silence finally started getting to me. My uncle had let me use the place to clear my head after the divorce, said the quiet would be good for me. Maybe it was for a while. But there's a kind of quiet up here that doesn't exist anywhere else, an old, heavy kind. The trees don't move, the wind doesn't sing. It's like the whole mountain holds its breath once the sun goes down. I thought I could handle it, but by that 6th night, I realized I needed to hear another voice. Any voice. The cabin had an old battery radio on the counter. One of those boxy AM/FM types with a big silver dial and a broken antenna. It smelled like dust and cigarettes when I turned it on. For a few minutes, it was just static, the kind that fills every corner of a room with its soft, endless hiss. Then I caught a faint signal, music maybe. But when I adjusted the dial, it slipped away again. That's when I found it, Channel 7. At first, it was just static too, but then I heard something underneath it, a whisper, so faint I almost missed it. I leaned closer. It said my name. I laughed it off at first. Must have been a random sound, part of the interference. But then it said it again. Clearer this time, slow and deliberate, like someone trying to remember how to form the word. Daniel. I froze. The voice was low and rough, like it came from far away, or from behind something. It didn't sound like anyone I knew. I told myself it was coincidence, that maybe a nearby signal was bleeding through. That's what I wanted to believe. I twisted the dial to change stations, but no matter how far I turned it, the voice stayed. Daniel. He's sitting at the table now. I looked down at my hands resting on the kitchen table. He's looking at the door. The breath caught in my throat. I spun the radio around, checking for a transmitter or something, a phone hidden behind it, a prank device, anything. But it was just a radio. Old, dented, and dead simple. My first thought was that someone was outside. Maybe the locals were playing games, testing the city boy who came up the mountain alone. I grabbed the flashlight and stepped out onto the porch. The forest stretched out black and still in every direction. Not a sound. Even the crickets were quiet. Back inside, the voice was still talking. He's by the door now. I yanked the batteries out. The static stopped, and for a moment I felt that strange relief you get after a nightmare. Like it's over. Like you can breathe again. Then, faintly from somewhere in the room, the whisper came again. He's listening. I dropped the flashlight. The beam rolled across the floor and caught on the kitchen wall. I swear I saw a shadow move there. Something tall, thin, like a person standing just out of reach of the light. But when I looked directly, there was nothing. The voice didn't come again that night. But I didn't sleep either. I sat with my back against the wall until the sky went gray and the birds started up again. The next morning I tried to convince myself it hadn't happened. The batteries must have still had some charge, I thought. Maybe the voice was just some freak radio signal bouncing around the mountains. I even turned the radio back on later that day to prove it. For a while, it worked like normal, just news, weather, an old gospel station. Then around dusk, the static crept back in. I was halfway through making coffee when I heard it again. Daniel. It wasn't whispering this time. The voice sounded closer, like it was speaking directly into the mic right beside my ear. I turned the volume down, but it didn't matter. The whisper stayed the same, constant. He's standing by the stove. I slammed my hand down on the radio. The sound warped, crackled, then went quiet. My heart was pounding. I turned to look at the stove, half expecting someone to be standing behind me. Nothing. I packed my things. I didn't even care about the storm rolling in. I was ready to drive out that night. But when I tried to start the truck, the battery was dead, completely drained. Rain started soon after, hard enough to blur the windows. The woods outside disappeared into sheets of gray. The power flickered, then went out. I sat in the dark, flashlight dying. Every sound from the cabin suddenly louder than it should have been. The floorboards creaking, the walls groaning under the wind, and beneath all of it, faint but steady, the low hiss of static. I thought I'd imagined it until I saw the radio's red light blink on again. The batteries weren't even inside. The static grew louder. Then the voice came through. He's sitting in the dark. My throat went dry. I wanted to scream, to throw the damn thing out into the rain, but I couldn't move. The voice had changed. It wasn't rough anymore. It sounded calm, gentle even, like someone standing right behind me, speaking low so only I could hear. "You shouldn't have come here." I turned around fast, flashlight shaking in my hand. The kitchen was empty, but the air felt wrong. Thick, heavy, like the room was smaller than it should have been. "Who are you?" I whispered. The radio hissed louder, then quieted, until the only thing left was breathing. Slow, steady, human. It took me a moment to realize it was matching mine. Every inhale, every exhale, exact. I backed away, knocking over the chair, and that's when the voice said something new. "He's leaving the room." I froze. It was describing me again, exactly as I moved. Every shift, every glance. He's looking at the window. He's holding the flashlight. He's shaking. Then, slowly, the voice said, "He's not alone." Something moved in the reflection of the glass, just for a second. A shape standing outside the window, close enough to fog the glass. I bolted for the door, but when I opened it, the air hit me like ice. The rain had stopped, and the forest was perfectly still. I ran to the truck anyway and climbed inside. I locked the doors, turned the key, hoping the engine would catch, but it was dead silent. Then I heard the static again. Not from the cabin this time, from the truck's radio. The voice came through clearer than ever, low and close. "He's sitting in the truck now." I started screaming. I pounded the dashboard, the horn, anything to make noise. The voice kept talking, calm as ever. "He's looking in the mirror." I stopped. Slowly, I raised my eyes to the rear view. There was someone sitting in the back seat, just a shape. No details, no features, just the faint outline of a man in the dark. I spun around, but the seat was empty. When I looked back at the mirror, the shape was gone. I don't remember getting out of the truck. I just know I ended up running through the woods barefoot, the ground slick and cold under my feet. I didn't stop until I saw the lights of the highway far below, like stars scattered across the valley. When I finally came back the next morning with help, the cabin was quiet. Everything was where I'd left it, except for the radio. It sat in the middle of the floor, batteries still missing, the power light blinking faintly. We didn't stay long. The sheriff looked at me like I was crazy when I told him about the voice. He said maybe I'd fallen asleep, had a bad dream, but when I got back to town that night, I checked into a cheap motel just off Route 60. The clerk handed me the key and pointed down the hall. Room 7. I should have asked for another room, but I didn't. I just wanted to lie down, close my eyes, and forget. The TV in the room was one of those old models with built-in radio channels. I didn't touch it, didn't even plug it in. But around midnight, when I was half asleep, the static started. Soft at first, like rain against the window. Then louder, then a whisper. "He's lying in bed now." I opened my eyes. The screen was dark. The plug was still out of the wall, and the voice was right beside my ear. The window above the sink had a strange way of bending light. The glass wasn't flat. It rippled, warped the world outside like water over stone. I'd grown up in that cabin, and that window had always been there. My grandmother used to say the glass was tired, that it sagged with age. I never thought much of it until that foggy morning when I saw her standing out there among the trees. The fog was thick, curling low across the grass, moving like something alive. I remember wiping my hand across the glass, clearing a small circle, just enough to look out while I made coffee. That's when I saw her, pale, still, and standing at the edge of the woods. Her dress blended into the mist, but I could make out her face. Or maybe I couldn't. It was more the shape of a face, hollow, long, almost featureless. I watched her for a full minute, waiting for movement, for her to walk away, but she didn't. She just stood there, watching, I figured it was a neighbor. There weren't many out this way, but sometimes hikers wandered through the ridge trails. I went to the back door, opened it a crack, and called out. My voice vanished into the fog like a pebble dropped in water. No echo, no answer. When I looked back through the window, she was gone. That day felt wrong. Even after the fog lifted, I kept glancing out at the tree line. Every time I walked past that window, I felt like I was walking past someone staring in. That evening, the light outside shifted strange, too gray for sunset, too heavy for twilight. When I looked again, she was there, in the exact same spot, facing the house. I thought maybe my mind was playing tricks on me, but she was closer now, maybe 20 feet from the trees. Her head tilted, just a little, like she was curious. I locked the doors that night. I'd never locked them before. Out here, you didn't need to. But as I was closing the curtains, I caught a glimpse of her again. Not out by the trees, closer, just beyond the yard. I didn't sleep much. Every creak in the floor sounded like a footstep. The next morning, the fog was thicker. I could barely see my porch from the sink. I wiped the glass clear, more out of habit than curiosity. The world outside looked like milk, dense and colorless. But through that shifting haze, I thought I saw her again. Closer than before. This time she wasn't standing still. Her head was turned, like she was looking at something off to the side. Like she wasn't waiting anymore. She was searching. I tried not to look out for the rest of the day. I turned on the radio, kept busy, anything to fill the silence. But as night came on, that same heaviness crept in. I went to the window one last time before bed. I shouldn't have. The glass was fogged from the inside, and when I wiped it clean, she wasn't outside anymore. She was gone. The relief hit me hard, like a deep breath after holding one too long. I turned to walk away, and froze. In the window's reflection just over my shoulder, there was a shape behind me. A woman's outline. Long hair, still as a shadow. My blood ran cold. I turned fast, heart hammering, but the kitchen was empty. Only the hum of the refrigerator and the whisper of wind through the chimney. When I looked back, her reflection was gone too. That night, I moved a chair in front of the window and sat with my back to it. I couldn't bear to see anything else. Around midnight, the wind picked up, pushing at the eaves. The sound of branches scraping the siding filled the dark. Then came another sound, faint, deliberate. Fingertips on glass, just one long drag across the window pane. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. The sound came again, slower this time, then stopped. When I woke in the morning, the chair was still there, the window fogged over. I almost didn't look, but something in me needed to know. When I wiped the glass clean, I saw smudges, 5 long streaks, running downward from the outside. Like someone had pressed their hand there and slid it down slowly. I called my uncle that day, told him what I'd seen. He laughed at first, said maybe some drifter was trying to spook me. But when I mentioned the window, his tone changed. He went quiet, then said, "That window's older than the house. Don't open it, ever." I asked him what he meant, but he just said he'd explain when he came by next week. He never did. His truck broke down on the highway, and I never saw him again. The days after that blurred together. I stopped looking out the window. I covered it with an old bed sheet, nailed along the edges so no light could get through. But at night, when I walked through the kitchen, I could see her shadow moving behind the sheet. Slow, gliding motions, like someone pacing just on the other side. On the third night, I heard her voice. Faint at first, a whisper in the space between heartbeats. "Why'd you cover me?" It said. I froze. The words didn't come from the window. They came from inside the room. The air grew colder, pressing against my skin. I turned toward the sink, and there she was, reflected in the rippled glass above it. Her face almost human, but stretched too thin, eyes hollow and wet, like fog trapped inside a skull. She wasn't behind me. She was in the reflection, looking out at me from the glass itself. I stumbled back, knocking over a chair. The sound broke whatever hold the moment had. The reflection rippled, blurred, and she was gone. I tore that sheet down and boarded the window shut, hammered the nails until my hands bled. That night, I sat in the living room, lights off, waiting for the sun. But when it finally came, the boards were gone. The window was clear again. And on the inside of the glass, pressed in the condensation, was a handprint. Small, slender, facing inward. I left that cabin the next morning. Didn't pack much, just drove until the road turned to gravel, then dust. But sometimes when the fog gets thick in the hollers, I see shapes moving in it. Once Once I even saw a reflection in my truck window that didn't belong to me. Long hair, hollow face, head tilted slightly like she was curious. I don't go near old windows anymore. Not in cabins, not in cars, not anywhere. Because sometimes when the glass is old enough and tired enough, it doesn't just reflect you, it remembers. The storm rolled in just after midnight, dragging thunder through the valley like a heavy chain. Out here, storms weren't just background noise, they were events. The kind that shook the windows, rattled the rafters, and swallowed every bit of sound around you until it felt like the world itself was holding its breath. I'd gotten used to it. Power went out all the time in the mountains. You light a few candles, wait it out, and by morning, everything hums back to life again. But that night, something about that night felt different. I was sitting on the couch reading by lantern light when the wind changed. It wasn't a gust, it was a pull, like something outside was drawing in a deep breath. The walls seemed to flex, the kind of subtle shift you only notice when you've lived in a place long enough to feel its heartbeat. Then the lights went out. Everything went dark except for the low glow of the lantern. I remember checking my phone, watching the signal bars fade to nothing. Just one notification blinked on the screen before it went dim. Front door opened. At first, I thought maybe it was a glitch. The storm sometimes messed with the sensors. But something in me, the part that had learned to listen when the woods went quiet, told me it wasn't a glitch. My blood went cold so fast it felt like my body forgot how to move. The sound of rain faded until I could hear nothing but my own breathing. I reached for the flashlight on the coffee table, and my hand was shaking so badly I almost dropped it. The beam cut through the darkness in a narrow line, slicing across the living room toward the door. It was closed, perfectly shut, but the mat was crooked. And just beyond it, on the wooden floor, were wet prints, bare feet smeared with mud, glistening in the light. They led inward, away from the door. I told myself it had to be my imagination, a trick of the light, maybe even my own footprints tracked in from earlier. But I hadn't gone outside all day. The storm had started before sunset. Those prints were fresh. I started moving toward them, one slow step at a time, each board underfoot groaning loud enough to make my heart skip. The flashlight trembled in my grip, the beam bouncing across the furniture, the walls, the floor. The prints went past the rug, across the hallway, and stopped at the threshold to my bedroom. The door was half open, the dark beyond it thick and uninviting. I stood there for what felt like an hour, just staring into that black space. My mind raced. What if someone broke in and passed out in there? What if they were still inside, waiting for me to come closer? The rain against the windows made it worse, masking every small sound. I couldn't tell if the floor creaked from my own movement or someone else's. Then, out of nowhere, the power flickered back on. The light was harsh after the dark, buzzing overhead. The heater kicked in, the refrigerator hummed, the world filled with noise again. It should have been a relief, but it wasn't. Because in that moment, as my eyes adjusted, I realized something. The prints ended at my bedroom door, but they didn't come back out. I forced myself to look inside. The flashlight beam swept across the room. Bed unmade, closet open, nothing out of place. No one there. I even checked under the bed, behind the curtains. Nothing. Just silence. Thick and wrong. I should have felt safe after that. But I didn't. The air in the cabin felt stale, like it hadn't been breathed in hours. I locked the front door, checked every window latch, and finally went back to my bedroom, closing the door behind me. I left the flashlight on the nightstand and tried to lie down, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time I started to drift, I'd hear something faint, a shuffle, a creak, a breath. At some point I must have dozed off, because I woke up to a different kind of sound. Slow, wet, like someone dragging a hand across the floorboards just outside my door. My throat tightened. I sat up, barely breathing, listening. The sound stopped. Then came a soft tap. 3 knocks, low, deliberate, on the other side of the door. My mind screamed to stay still, to not make a sound. The flashlight flickered once, then went out. The room plunged into darkness again, the kind that presses against your eyes. I could hear the rain still, but faintly, distant now, like it wasn't outside anymore. Like it was deeper, under the sound of breathing. I don't know how long I stayed frozen. Minutes, hours? Eventually the knock stopped. The air warmed again. When morning light crept through the blinds, I opened the door. There were no footprints this time. No signs of anyone. The floor was clean. Too clean. I tried to tell myself it was a dream, maybe a half-awake nightmare from the storm. I went to check the front door. The mud on the mat was gone. The sensor light blinked once before shutting off. But when I stepped outside, something caught my eye in the mud near the porch. Prints again, bare, human. But this time they led away from the cabin, down the hill toward the tree line. And halfway between the porch and the woods they just stopped. That was weeks ago. The sensor still goes off sometimes, always at 3:17 a.m. sharp. The door never opens. But every time the power flickers during a storm, I swear I can hear those same 3 knocks somewhere in the dark. Quiet, patient, waiting for me to move. It was mid-autumn when I moved into my uncle's old cabin. Just me, the woods, and the kind of silence that starts to feel heavy after a while. The place sat halfway up a ridge, swallowed by trees that blocked out most of the sky. It wasn't much to look at. 2 rooms, a sagging porch, and a roof that leaked in 3 places. But it was quiet, and that was what I needed. I was running from noise. City noise. People noise. I thought the mountains would give me peace. For the first few weeks it did. I spent my mornings splitting firewood and my evenings listening to the forest hum, owls, wind, the occasional fox scream that made my blood run cold until I remembered what it was. But then little things started to change. The quiet didn't sound the same anymore. It wasn't empty. It was listening. The first night I noticed it, the crickets had gone dead silent all at once. The air got still, like the forest was holding its breath. Then I heard a sound I couldn't place. Something mechanical, faint, a soft click, click, click that seemed to come from somewhere near the back of the cabin. I figured maybe an animal had knocked something over, so I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. The cold hit hard, wet and sharp. The beam swept across the yard, catching the glint of something metallic wedged between 2 stones by the tree line. It was an old voice recorder. Black, scratched, still running. I hesitated before touching it. The tiny red light blinked steadily, and I could hear a faint hiss of static from its speaker. I picked it up, brushed the dirt off, and pressed play. What came out froze me. It was my voice, clear as day, low and calm, like I was talking to someone close by. I said things like, "I don't think it's gone yet," and it moved closer to the window this time. My stomach turned. I hadn't spoken to anyone. I hadn't even seen another person in weeks. The recording went on for nearly an hour. The sound of wind, creaking wood, my voice describing details that didn't make sense, scratches on the inside of the walls, a shape in the reflection of the window, footsteps in the crawl space. I didn't remember any of it. I'd been asleep the night before. I knew I had been. I turned it off halfway through, my hands slick with sweat despite the cold. I didn't want to hear more. But curiosity is a cruel thing. It doesn't leave you alone. I sat there staring at the recorder until finally I pressed play again. Near the end, my voice got quieter, shaky. Then there was silence. 10 seconds of nothing. Then I heard breathing. Not mine, deeper, slower. The kind of sound someone makes when they're trying not to be heard. Then a whisper, close enough to the mic that it crackled. "He doesn't know we're here." I dropped the recorder. I don't remember going inside, but I locked every door and window. I sat by the fireplace till dawn, every pop of burning wood making me flinch. When daylight came, I went back outside. The recorder was still there where I'd dropped it, half buried in leaves. The battery light had gone dark. For the next 2 days, I tried to ignore it. Told myself I'd imagined the whole thing. The mind plays tricks when you're isolated. But on the 3rd night, I woke up to that same faint clicking sound. It was coming from under the cabin. I told myself it was an animal, maybe a raccoon. But when I went outside and crouched near the foundation, I saw a light flickering faintly through the slats. Red, blinking. The recorder. Running again. I should have left it alone. I know that now. But I reached under and pulled it out. It was cold, colder than the ground around it. The play button was already pressed. The screen glowed dimly, counting up time. I lifted it close to my ear. Breathing, movement, a door creaking open. Then again, my voice. This time it was quieter, closer to the mic. "I think I hear them under the floor." Then came another voice, low and rough. It didn't sound human. The words were slurred, like someone trying to imitate speech. "Keep listening. I dropped it again and stumbled backward, almost falling. The sound kept going, echoing from the dirt. I went inside, slammed the door, and shoved a chair under the handle. I didn't sleep. By morning, it had stopped. I went outside again, half expecting the recorder to be gone. It wasn't. It was sitting on the porch now, perfectly centered, as if someone had placed it there. The battery was dead, but I couldn't bring myself to touch it again. That afternoon, I packed a bag. I didn't care about leaving food behind or the rest of my stuff. I just needed to get out. The trail down the ridge was narrow, twisting through the trees, and the fog came down fast. By the time I reached the first bend, visibility was maybe 10 feet. I stopped to catch my breath, and that's when I heard it again. Click, click, click. Not from behind me this time. From ahead, somewhere in the fog. I stood frozen, listening. The sound came closer, steady. Then a voice followed. Mine. "He's leaving," it said. "He's taking the path." I ran. I don't even remember how long or where my feet took me. When I finally reached the main road, my lungs were burning, and the fog was gone. I looked back up the ridge once, and I swear I saw something move in the trees, a flash of red like a blinking light. I never went back for my things. A few months later, the land was sold, and the new owners had the cabin torn down. They said it wasn't worth saving. Too much rot in the foundation. The demolition crew found old cans, tools, animal bones, and one other thing under the floorboards. A small black recorder. Still running. I heard about that part from the sheriff. He said the last few seconds of the tape were just static. Then a voice, my voice. It said, "He doesn't know we're here." It was the kind of winter that seeps into your bones, where the air hangs heavy and still, and sound doesn't travel right. I'd been living alone for about 6 months in that cabin, tucked deep in the Appalachian foothills. No neighbors close enough to see, no cell signal worth a damn. Just me, the woods, and my old hound, Jasper. He was a calm dog, the kind that only barked if there was real cause for concern. For years, I trusted his instincts more than my own. But that winter, something in him changed. It started small. Around dusk, he'd perk up, ears stiff, nose in the air, and stare out through the front window. His fur would bristle, his body tense, and a low rumble would start deep in his throat. Then, as the light died from the trees, he'd start barking. Loud, frantic, as if he were warning something off. I'd go to the door, flashlight in hand, and find nothing but darkness and snow. I'd tell him to hush, to lie down, but he wouldn't. His eyes wouldn't leave the woods. After a week of that, I started to get unnerved. It wasn't like him. Jasper had grown up on a farm. Coyotes, deer, even the occasional bear didn't rattle him. But whatever he saw, or thought he saw out there, it put him on edge every single night. One evening, I decided to put an end to it. I stepped out with the flashlight and the rifle, snow crunching under my boots, the beam cutting through the fog. Jasper stayed on the porch, tail down, still barking. I scanned the tree line, calling out just in case it was some lost hiker or poacher. My voice sounded too loud, bouncing back off the hills. Nothing moved, nothing answered. Only that deep silence that comes before a storm. Then I heard something, just a faint sound, like breathing. I turned the light toward it, but the fog swallowed everything past 10 feet. The sound stopped. When I looked back, Jasper wasn't barking anymore. He was staring, eyes locked on something just behind me. I spun around, light trembling in my hand. There was no one there. That night I barely slept. Jasper paced by the front door, growling low now and then. Every few minutes his ears would twitch toward the window, and he'd give this quiet whine that I'd never heard from him before, almost like fear. Around midnight, the power flickered, then went out. The house went black, and the only sound was the wind outside rattling the shutters. I got up, threw on a coat, and went to check the generator in the shed out back. Jasper didn't follow this time. He stayed by the door, whining. When I opened it, he backed away, tail between his legs. I remember the cold hit me first, like a wall. My flashlight beam cut through the snowflakes, and I could barely see past the porch. I started walking toward the shed when I saw tracks. Not Jasper's, not mine. Bare footprints, half filled with fresh snow, leading from the tree line toward the house. They were small, maybe a child's, but too long. The toes spread oddly far apart. My skin prickled. I followed them with the light, and they went right up to the shed, stopping by the door. The padlock hung open. That didn't make sense. I'd locked it myself earlier that evening. I raised the flashlight, heart pounding. and saw the door was cracked open just enough for me to see darkness inside. I called out, a nervous, stupid hello that froze in my throat. No answer. Just the creak of the door as the wind moved it slightly. I should have gone back inside, but I didn't. I pushed it open, the hinges shrieking, and swept the light across the inside. Empty. Everything in its place. The tools, the fuel cans, the generator. I started to breathe again until I noticed something on the far wall. A handprint, smudged high up near the window. It wasn't dirt or grease. It was dark, almost black, and streaked downward like something had dragged its fingers. I backed out slowly, locked the shed, and followed the footprints back toward the cabin. They stopped at the porch steps. Then they turned around, headed back toward the woods. But they didn't fade evenly like they should have in snow. It was as if whoever, or whatever, made them had lifted straight off the ground after the fifth step. That night, Jasper didn't bark. He just sat by the window, staring out, ears twitching. The next morning, I tried to brush it off as my imagination. Maybe some local kid playing a prank. Maybe an animal with odd tracks. I told myself that over and over, but Jasper didn't believe it. Every night after that, as the sun dropped, he'd start again, barking at the same spot in the woods. I tried everything. Kept him inside, put up motion lights, even fired a few rounds into the air, hoping to scare off whatever was out there. Nothing changed. Then came the night that broke me. It was a Saturday, late January. I'd been chopping wood most of the afternoon and was bone tired. The sun had just set and the temperature had dropped fast. Jasper started up again, barking and clawing at the door, more frantic than usual. I yelled at him to stop, but he wouldn't. Finally, I grabbed the flashlight, opened the door, and stepped out, cursing under my breath. The cold hit like a slap. Jasper stood at my side, muscles taut, barking straight ahead into the trees. I followed his line of sight and saw it. Someone was standing just beyond the tree line. Tall, thin, wrong somehow. The flashlight beam caught its outline, and I swear its head was tilted too far to one side, like its neck had given up holding it upright. The body didn't move, didn't flinch. It just stood there watching us. I shouted, told them to leave, that I was armed. No reaction. Jasper's barking turned into this high-pitched yelp, almost panicked. Then the figure shifted. No step, no sound. Just a slow, jerky tilt as if trying to straighten its head. That was enough. I fired once into the air. The echo rolled through the valley. When the smoke cleared, the figure was gone. But Jasper, he wasn't barking anymore. He was staring at the door of the cabin, tail tucked. Then came the sound, scratching, slow, deliberate, from the outside of the front door. It wasn't claws. It wasn't wood creaking. It sounded like fingers dragging up and down the planks. I froze. My breath fogged in front of me. The scratching moved higher, then stopped. I waited, straining to hear. Nothing. When I finally opened the door, nothing was there. But on the wood I saw marks. 5 long gouges, uneven, like nails had split trying to dig through. I didn't sleep that night. I sat up with the rifle across my lap while Jasper paced, whining. Every so often he'd look toward the door and growl low. Around 3 a.m., I heard it again, faint scratching, but this time from the window beside me. I turned slowly, raising the flashlight. A shape moved just beyond the glass. I caught a glimpse of something pale, maybe a hand, sliding down the pane. I pulled the curtains shut and didn't open them again until sunrise. After that, I stopped going outside at night. I nailed the windows shut, bolted the doors, even set traps along the porch. But Jasper kept barking. Every night. Until one morning he didn't. It was quiet when I woke. Too quiet. I checked every room, called for him, but the house felt empty. I stepped outside and saw his paw prints leading off the porch into the snow. They stopped about 20 feet from the edge of the woods. No blood, no drag marks, just stopped, like he'd vanished mid-step. I called his name until my throat hurt, but there was nothing. Just the wind in the trees and a faint sound, like whispering from somewhere deeper in the forest. I couldn't make out the words, but it made my stomach twist. That night I kept the lights on, every single one. I tried to convince myself he'd wandered off chasing a deer, but sometime past midnight, the motion light on the porch clicked on. I froze, staring at the door. Then I heard it, soft, muffled barking. Jasper's bark, relief hit me like a wave. I ran to the door and called out his name. His barking stopped. Then came the scratching again, light, rhythmic on the wood. I hesitated, hand on the handle. Something felt wrong. Jasper never scratched. He'd whine or nudge when he wanted in. I pressed my ear to the door. Silence, then a single long drag, fingernails against wood, and a low whisper just on the other side. "Let me in." My blood ran cold. The voice wasn't mine, and it sure as hell wasn't Jasper's. It sounded too calm, too steady. I stepped back slowly, heart hammering. Then, from outside the back window, I heard barking again, Jasper's real bark. Panicked and far away, the scratching at the front door grew louder, faster, almost frantic. I didn't move, didn't breathe. And then, just like that, it stopped. I waited hours before I dared open that door. When I finally did, morning light spilled in across the floor. The snow was undisturbed. No footprints, no sign of Jasper. I've stayed in that cabin ever since. Haven't gone into town, haven't left the woods. But some nights, around dusk, I still hear barking from somewhere deep in the trees. And if I listen close enough underneath it, under the wind, under the echo of that lonely sound, I can still hear the faint scrape of fingers on wood, dragging down the front door. And I swear, some nights when I wake, I see Jasper sitting by the window again, just staring out into the woods, tail still, eyes wide, like he's waiting for me to notice what's standing just beyond the tree line. Here's the full expanded version of The Voice in the Ducks, written in first-person Appalachian horror style, grounded, cinematic, and deeply unsettling, matching the pacing and tone of Mr. Skeleton's stories. It was the kind of cold that made the cabin feel like it was breathing. The old place had stood here since the 40s, patched up over the decades by whoever could afford to live this far out. The walls were thin, the windows old and stubborn, and the heating system, God, that heating system, was a relic from another time. Long metal ducts ran under the floors and through the walls, connected to a furnace in the crawl space that groaned and rattled like a dying animal whenever it kicked on. I'd bought the cabin cheap. Too cheap. That should have told me something, but I was broke and needed a place to disappear for a while, so I told myself the noises were just what came with old homes. I'd hear the ducks creak at night, the pipes settle, the wind slip through cracks in the wood. None of it bothered me much, until the night I heard the voice. It was late, maybe a little after 2 in the morning. I'd fallen asleep on the couch, still wearing my jacket, the fire down to embers. The furnace kicked on with that familiar deep groan, air hissing through the vents. But underneath the sound, so faint at first I thought I was dreaming, I heard something else. A whisper. It came from the vent above the couch, just a low broken murmur carried on the breath of the furnace. I remember leaning up, half awake, straining to hear. It sounded like a man's voice, though I couldn't make out the words. I shut off the TV, turned down the lamp, and listened again. Hello? I froze. The word was soft, drawn out, like someone testing their own voice. The furnace clicked off, and the whisper stopped with it. For a while, all I heard was my own breathing and the faint ticking of the fire. I waited there, heart pounding, telling myself it was just the wind moving through the vents. But when the furnace came back on, so did the voice. This time it was clearer. "Can you hear me?" The sound crawled along the metal, like words being dragged through a tunnel. It came from deep inside the ducts. Not from any one vent, but from everywhere at once. I sat there listening, every hair on my body standing up. My first thought was that maybe some sound was leaking in from outside, maybe a hunter's radio or an old CB signal bouncing around. That seemed reasonable enough, and I clung to it. I turned up the thermostat to keep the furnace running, hoping to catch another word, something to explain it. What I heard next made my blood go cold. Eli. It said my name. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. The way it said it, slow, wet, almost curious, made me feel like something was down there watching me through the vents. I grabbed the flashlight and went to the floor vent by the kitchen. The metal grill was rusted, the screws loose. I knelt down, held my ear close, and listened. Faint breathing came through, steady, human. Eli. Come look. I dropped the flashlight. The voice wasn't echoing like sound should through metal. It had depth, texture, saliva. It sounded too close. I slammed the vent shut and stood there shaking. I didn't sleep that night. Every time the furnace kicked on, I'd hear faint muttering through the walls. Sometimes laughter, sometimes words I couldn't understand. By morning, I'd convinced myself I had to check. If I didn't, I'd never rest again. The crawl space under the cabin was barely tall enough to sit upright in. The dirt floor was damp, the air freezing. I pulled myself in with a flashlight and a wrench, trying to follow the main duct line. Dust fell in soft clouds with every movement. The metal duct stretched off into darkness, twisting toward the back of the house. I tapped it lightly. The sound echoed. Then I heard it, tapping back one tap. Then two, like someone answering. I froze, breath fogging the beam of my flashlight. "Who's there?" I whispered before I could stop myself. The response came almost instantly, a breathy whisper barely audible. "You know who?" I scrambled backwards so fast I smacked my head on a joist. The flashlight slipped from my hand, rolling in the dirt. I crawled after it, heart hammering. When I found it again, the beam caught something ahead, something pale, pressed against the duct wall. A handprint. It was faint, smeared in dust, but unmistakable. 5 fingers, long and narrow, as if someone had pressed their hand to the metal from the inside. I scrambled out of that crawl space, slammed the hatch shut, and shoved a chair over it. The furnace kicked on again a few minutes later, and I swore I could hear muffled laughter rattling through the floor. For the next 2 days, I didn't go near the ducts. I lit fires, kept the space heaters running, anything to avoid using the furnace. The silence was worse in some ways, too still, like the house was holding its breath. Then the temperature dropped to single digits, and I didn't have a choice. The night I turned the furnace back on, the voice returned. Louder this time. It didn't whisper anymore. It talked. At first, just nonsense. Phrases that didn't make sense. "We were here. Don't close it. He's listening." The voice came from different vents now. One moment the hallway, then the bedroom, then the living room. Each time it moved, I'd hear the faint scraping of metal, like something dragging itself along the inside of the ductwork. I started keeping a hammer by the bed. I thought about calling someone, but who would believe me? "There's a man living in my vents?" Even I didn't believe it. Not really. I just couldn't think of anything else it could be. A few nights later, the furnace kicked on while I was in bed. I heard the voice again, clearer than ever, coming from the vent near my head. "Eli, you shouldn't have gone under there." I jumped up, backing away from the wall. The voice kept talking, quieter now, almost playful. "We were sleeping. You woke us." I didn't wait to hear more. I turned off the thermostat, pulled the fuse on the furnace, and sat there in silence. But the whisper didn't stop. The air ducts weren't running, yet the voice still echoed faintly through the walls. I pressed my ear to the drywall and heard it again, this time behind me. It wasn't in the vents anymore. I don't remember much of what I did after that. I know I tore apart one of the vent covers with a screwdriver, trying to see if something had crawled inside. Nothing. Just cold air and dust. I knocked on the walls, called out, shouted that I wasn't afraid, even though my voice shook. The whisper only answered when I stopped talking. Not walls. "We're closer." That broke me. I packed a bag and got ready to leave, but as I reached for the front door, I heard the ducts groan again, louder than they ever had. The air hissed out of every vent in the house, carrying that same awful laughter. It wasn't just one voice anymore. There were many, all overlapping, some whispering, some gasping, some laughing, and under all of it, one voice said clear as day, right behind my ear, "Don't go." I ran. I made it halfway down the drive before I realized I'd forgotten my truck keys. The wind was cutting through me, snow blowing sideways. I turned back toward the cabin, lights flickering inside. The furnace had come back on. I stood there in the snow, staring through the front window. Shadows moved across the walls, long, thin shapes bending where they shouldn't. I could see the vent cover in the living room vibrating, shaking on its screws like something was forcing air through too fast. Then, one by one, every vent in the house started banging open and shut, slamming in rhythm like a heartbeat. I watched from the tree line as the lights inside flickered and died. The noise stopped. Then faintly through the wind, I heard it again, my name drifting from the chimney, stretched thin like a scream dragged through a pipe. Eli. I never went back inside. In the weeks that followed, I stayed in town, sleeping in my truck. I told people I was selling the place. Nobody asked why. They just nodded like they already knew. A man at the hardware store told me the cabin used to belong to a heating contractor who went missing sometime in the 60s. They never found him. His tools were still under the floor when they sold the place. I didn't tell him what I'd heard. I didn't have to. The way he looked at me, like he already understood, was enough. That was last winter. But lately, when I stay somewhere too quiet, some cheap motel, some friend's basement, I start to hear it again. That low metal hum, the faint groan of ducks expanding with heat. And sometimes, just before I fall asleep, I swear I hear my name echoing softly through the vents. Eli. I try to tell myself it's just the wind. But every time I hear it, the air feels heavier, warmer, like someone's exhaling right against my ear. And I know deep down, if I ever crawl under another floor, I'll hear that same hollow laughter waiting for me in the dark. The attic had always made me uneasy, even before I ever opened it. The cabin itself wasn't much, just 2 rooms and a narrow kitchen, built into the hillside like most of the old places out here. I'd inherited it from my grandfather after he passed. I didn't know him well, just that he'd lived alone for decades after my grandmother left. My mother never talked about why. When I asked, she'd just say, "That place isn't meant to be lived in," and leave it at that. I moved in early fall, when the nights were still just cool enough to keep the windows open. I told myself it would just be for a few months, long enough to fix the place up and maybe sell it. But from the first night, I felt something off about the cabin's silence. Not peaceful, not even empty, just listening. The attic hatch was in the hallway ceiling, a square panel with a rusted latch and a short length of rope hanging down. I didn't touch it for the first week. Every time I walked underneath, I'd feel a faint draft, like air slipping through the cracks. One evening, as the light faded behind the ridge, I heard something shift up there. Just a soft scrape, like dust falling or fabric brushing wood. I told myself it was mice, or maybe a squirrel that got in through the eaves. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was up there had been waiting for me to notice. It took another few days before I finally got the nerve to pull the hatch open. When I did, the smell hit me first. Old dust, cold wood, and something else underneath, faint and sour, like wet cloth that had been left too long. I dragged a chair over, climbed up, and shone my flashlight into the dark. The attic was low and cramped, the rafters thick with cobwebs. Dust lay over everything like snow, boxes, old furniture, even an overturned rocking chair. It looked untouched for decades, but then my light passed over something that made me stop breathing. Footprints, a single trail of them, pressed deep into the dust. They started by the small round window at the far end, crossed the floor in a straight line, and stopped right at the edge of the trapdoor where I stood. The prints were clear. Boots, size of a man's foot. Fresh enough that the dust still looked disturbed, the edges sharp. I don't know how long I stared at them. The attic was sealed. The window didn't open, and the hatch had been latched when I pulled it down. I climbed back down slowly, shut the hatch, and twisted the latch tight. I even slid a nail through the latch hole just to be sure it couldn't move. I tried to forget about it. I swept the prints from my mind like I swept them from the floor, convincing myself they'd just been there all along. That night, I heard footsteps. At first, I thought it was the wind pushing against the roof. But then I heard the rhythm, slow, deliberate, crossing from one side of the ceiling to the other. Each step made the wood creak softly, like someone walking barefoot above me. I grabbed the flashlight and stared up at the hatch. The nail I'd pushed through the latch hole was still there, still untouched. The sound stopped after a while, leaving me sitting there in the dark, listening to the old house breathe. In the morning, I told myself I'd imagined it. Sleep deprivation, maybe, cabin settling. But when I walked into the hallway, something made my stomach twist. The dust on the floor beneath the hatch had fallen again. A faint sprinkle, just enough to see where it had shifted down from the seams. I climbed back up on the chair, flashlight in hand, and pulled the hatch down once more. There were new footprints, smaller this time, bare feet. The prints were light, like a child's, leading from the far side of the attic window again, straight to the hatch where I stood. The air up there felt colder than before, as if something had been breathing in it all night. I climbed down, closed the hatch, and nailed it shut this time. 3 nails, 1 on each corner. I told myself that was it. Whatever sound I heard from now on, I'd ignore it. That night, the sound came again. It started the same, soft creaks moving back and forth, but then it changed. The steps grew quicker, closer together, circling above the room like someone pacing in frustration. Then they stopped, right over my bed. I stared at the ceiling, barely breathing, the flashlight shaking in my hand. After a long moment, I heard the faintest sound, a whisper of movement like a knee shifting in dust. Then something else, a single light knock, right above my head. The sound went straight through me. I got up, heart hammering, and went into the hallway. The nails I'd driven into the hatch were still there, but the center of the wood looked bowed, like it had been pressed from the other side. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. In the morning, I called the local hardware guy, old man named Dillard, and asked if anyone had ever broken into this place before. He laughed and said nobody bothered coming up this far anymore. Then he paused and asked if I'd ever opened the attic. I told him yes, and the line went quiet for a few seconds before he said, "You shouldn't have done that," and hung up. That was 3 nights ago. Since then, the sound hasn't stopped. Every night I hear it start just after midnight. The faint shuffle of feet, the creak of boards. Always slow at first, then faster. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can almost feel the vibrations through the wall behind my head. Last night was the worst. I woke up to something soft landing on the floor beside me. I thought maybe a book had fallen off the shelf. When I turned on the light, I saw the dust, thin streaks of it across the floorboards, as if something had just moved through. My eyes went to the ceiling. The hatch was open. The nails were gone. Not pulled out. Gone, as if they'd been pushed up through the wood. The rope hung limp in the hallway, swaying slightly like someone had just climbed down. I didn't move. I just sat there, staring at the rope, waiting for something else to happen. The cabin was silent, but I could feel the weight of something in the dark with me. After a long time, I forced myself to check. I grabbed the flashlight and shone it toward the hatch. The floor beneath it was covered in fine dust, and in the center of that dust, a new set of footprints, small, barefoot. They led from the hatch, across the hallway, and stopped right beside my bed. I followed them with the light, hand shaking so bad I could barely hold it steady. The last print ended just before the edge of the rug. The wood there looked wrong, darker somehow. I knelt down and touched it, cold. And then, from somewhere behind the walls, I heard it. Soft, slow breathing. Not in the attic this time. Closer, right beneath the floorboards. I backed away, light darting from one corner to another. The sound followed me, shifting, dragging, like something crawling just under the planks. I didn't stay to find out what it was. I ran out of the cabin and didn't stop until I reached the tree line. I stood there in the frost, watching my own breath rise in clouds, waiting for dawn. When I finally went back that morning, everything was still. The hatch was closed again, the rope perfectly still, as if it hadn't moved at all. But when I looked closer, I saw something that made my blood turn to ice. The dust around my bed was disturbed. New prints. 2 sets this time. One small, one larger. Both barefoot. They led not to the attic or the hallway, but to the edge of the door. And on the inside of the door frame, drawn through the thin layer of dust, were 3 letters, written with a fingertip, "Stay."